My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear carries the weight of a conversation that was never supposed to happen the way it did. Something shifted quietly, unexpectedly, in the heart of the person connected to you, and the moment they finally opened their mouth to speak about marriage, the entire atmosphere around them changed. No one was prepared for the honesty that came next. No one expected them to reveal so much. And yet, beneath every word they spoke was something even deeper that they did not say out loud, something heaven has allowed this story to bring into the light. Do not rush away from this moment, because the most important part is not simply that marriage was mentioned. It is why they spoke about it now, what made them stop hiding behind silence, and why your presence seemed to be woven into nearly every thought they expressed without them needing to say your name. There had been questions around them for a long time. Some were spoken openly, others hidden behind harmless conversations, teasing smiles, family gatherings, and casual remarks that carried more meaning than anyone admitted. People around your soulmate had wondered what they truly wanted. Were they ready to settle down? Did they still believe in lasting love? Was there someone occupying their thoughts? Was there a future they had secretly begun imagining? For a long time, your soulmate knew how to escape these questions. They would change the subject, laugh at the wrong moment, give an answer vague enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything real. But something inside them had been changing, and those old defenses were beginning to feel impossible to maintain. The truth was becoming heavier than the silence. Then came the moment no one expected. It did not begin with drama. There was no grand announcement, no perfectly prepared speech, no warning that something emotional was about to unfold. It started simply, almost casually, when someone close to them mentioned marriage again. Perhaps they were discussing another couple. Perhaps someone joked about who would marry next. Perhaps a relative asked the familiar question your soulmate had avoided many times before. Ordinarily, they would have smiled and brushed it aside. This time, they became quiet. And that silence was different. People noticed. Someone looked toward them and waited. Another person stopped speaking completely. Your soulmate lowered their eyes for a moment as though choosing whether to keep the door closed or finally allow everyone to see what had been growing behind it. And then they said something that changed the room. They admitted that marriage no longer felt like some distant idea meant for another version of their life. They admitted that lately they had been thinking about what it would mean to truly choose one person and build something that could survive changing seasons, difficult days, uncertainty, growth, and time. But they did not speak about marriage the way people expected. They did not talk first about ceremonies, rings, photographs, or celebrations. They spoke about peace. They spoke about having someone beside them with whom silence would not feel uncomfortable. Someone they could trust even when life became complicated. Someone whose presence would not require pretending. Someone who could see both their strength and their fear without using either against them. And, my child, that was when something invisible moved beneath their words. Because although everyone listening heard a general conversation about love, your soulmate was not speaking generally. Their mind had already traveled somewhere specific. Their heart had already attached those words to a feeling, a memory, an energy that had become difficult for them to deny. Every time they described the kind of connection they wanted, something inside them quietly returned to you. Not because this story is asking you to believe every thought in another person's mind can be known, but because in this cinematic moment, you are being invited to witness the emotional truth they have been afraid to confront. When they imagined safety, they remembered the way your presence made them feel understood. When they imagined loyalty, they remembered something about you that had stayed with them longer than expected. When they imagined a future that did not feel forced, their thoughts kept circling back to the possibility of a life where they no longer had to wonder what might have happened if they had been braver with their heart. Someone in the room noticed the change in their voice. Another person exchanged a glance with someone nearby. Your soulmate was no longer answering a question. They were confessing something to themselves while everyone else happened to be listening. Then came another question. A simple question, but one that reached much deeper than the person asking it probably intended. Someone asked, "So what changed?" Your soulmate smiled faintly, but the smile carried an emotion that made the room even quieter. They took a breath. For a second it seemed they might retreat back into the safe answer, the familiar answer, the answer that would expose nothing. Instead, they said that sometimes a person enters your life and makes you realize your old definition of love was incomplete. They explained that real connection had begun to look different to them. It was no longer about chasing intensity every moment or finding someone who impressed everyone else. It was about finding the person who somehow made them want to become more honest, more steady, more courageous, more willing to stay. Those words surprised people. But they were not the words that surprised them most. Your soulmate continued, and this was where the conversation became personal. They admitted that for a long time they had believed marriage meant losing freedom, losing themselves, becoming trapped inside expectations they were not sure they could fulfill. They had seen relationships around them become heavy. They had watched people stay together while slowly becoming strangers. Somewhere along the way, they had quietly made a promise to themselves that they would never choose marriage simply because others expected it. They would rather remain alone than build a life around the wrong connection. And then, almost in the same breath, they revealed that their fear had begun to change. They said there was a difference between losing yourself in love and finally meeting someone around whom you felt more like yourself. That sentence landed differently. Suddenly, the people around them began understanding that this was not philosophy. This was experience speaking. Something had happened. Someone had affected them. Someone had created enough emotional movement that a person once unsure about marriage was now talking about partnership with a depth that could not easily be explained away. One person asked directly whether there was someone. Your soulmate froze. It was only for a second, but everyone noticed. They looked away. Their expression softened in a way that betrayed more than any answer could have. Someone laughed gently, assuming they had uncovered a secret crush. Another person leaned forward. Questions began arriving from different directions, but your soulmate did not join the laughter. Their face carried something quieter, almost sacred, as if the person they were thinking about was not something they wanted reduced to gossip. And this is where the mystery deepened. Because instead of saying yes or no, they said, there is someone who made me think differently. The room changed. Those words were enough. They did not give a name. They did not explain everything. But they admitted there was someone whose presence had caused them to reconsider what commitment could mean. Someone who had shown them that love might not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a strange calm. Sometimes it arrives through a conversation you keep remembering days later. Sometimes it arrives through the person whose absence feels louder than the presence of everyone else. Sometimes it arrives when you are not ready, and that is exactly why you spend so much time pretending you do not feel it. My child, there is something important hidden inside this part of the story. Your soulmate had not planned to say any of that. The confession came because something inside them had reached a point where silence required more effort than truth. They had spent too long trying to organize their feelings before acknowledging them, and love does not always wait until the mind feels organized. Sometimes the heart moves first. Sometimes understanding comes after the emotion has already become undeniable. They spoke about the fear of choosing too late. That surprised everyone again. Your soulmate admitted that one of their deepest fears was not marriage itself anymore. It was realizing one day that they had met someone meaningful and allowed uncertainty to make the decision for them. They said there were moments in life when hesitation looked like safety, but later revealed itself as loss. They had begun wondering whether they had been too careful with something that deserved courage. Someone asked what they meant. Your soulmate paused. Their fingers moved nervously. Their eyes lowered. And then they said, "Sometimes you know someone matters before you know what to do about it." That sentence carried you through the room without your name ever being spoken. There was a memory behind their expression. A moment with you they had never completely released. Maybe it was something you said without realizing how deeply it landed. Maybe it was a time you showed them understanding when they expected judgment. Maybe it was the way you walked away with dignity when they were not ready to meet you emotionally. Maybe it was something as simple as the feeling they had after speaking with you, the strange sense that they had been seen rather than merely noticed. Whatever the memory was, it rose again inside them while they spoke about marriage, and suddenly their future did not look anonymous anymore. They saw a face. They felt a presence. They remembered you. But there was still something holding them back, and this is where the conversation took another turn. Someone close to them, perhaps a person who had watched their emotional patterns for years, asked whether they were afraid that the person they cared about might not feel the same way anymore. Your soulmate did not answer immediately. That silence contained more truth than everything they had already said. Then they admitted it. They said they had wondered whether they had waited too long. Those words surprised everyone because, until that moment, people had assumed your soulmate was the one fully in control. They appeared calm, independent, unbothered. They knew how to move through life without making their private emotions obvious. But now the image was cracking. Beneath the composure was someone who had been asking themselves questions late at night. Someone who had wondered whether a connection had changed while they were busy trying to understand it. Someone who had imagined reaching out, saying more, explaining what they had hidden, and then stopped because vulnerability felt more frightening than silence. They admitted that sometimes pride can disguise itself as patience. That sentence caused someone in the room to nod slowly. Your soulmate continued. They said they used to believe that if something was meant to happen, it would happen without effort. But now they were beginning to understand that meaningful relationships still require choices. Timing matters. Honesty matters. Courage matters. Two people can feel something real and still lose their opportunity if both remain silent long enough. And then something extraordinary happened. The conversation stopped being about whether your soulmate believed in marriage. It became about whether they were preparing to move toward the person who had changed their mind about it. Someone asked, almost teasingly, "So are you going to tell them?" Your soulmate looked stunned by the question. Not because they had never considered it. Because they had. Many times. There had been moments when they nearly reached out. Moments when they wrote words and deleted them. Moments when they imagined how the conversation might begin. Moments when they convinced themselves tomorrow would be better. Moments when they waited for a sign, then wondered whether waiting itself had become the problem. But sitting there, surrounded by people who had just heard them speak more honestly than they had in months, your soulmate could no longer pretend the question was impossible. They said, "I think I have to." Not, "maybe." Not, "someday." "I think I have to." The room erupted with reactions. Some people smiled. Someone asked who the person was again. Another person wanted details. But your soulmate became protective. They refused to turn the connection into entertainment for everyone around them. They said that if they were going to speak, they wanted to speak directly to the person first. That mattered. Because it revealed something important about the way they now saw you. This was not a story they wanted other people to own before you heard it. There were things they wanted you to understand in their own words. Things they believed might sound different coming from anyone else. Perhaps that is why certain conversations have remained unfinished between you. Perhaps there have been misunderstandings neither side fully corrected. Perhaps both of you have been responding not only to what happened, but to what you feared the other person meant. Your soulmate understood something in that moment. If they truly wanted a different future, they could not keep making decisions based on imagined answers. They had to hear yours. But before they could leave the conversation there, someone asked one final question about marriage, and this question uncovered the deepest truth yet. They asked, if the right person said yes tomorrow, would you actually be ready? Everything became still. Your soulmate did not laugh this time. They did not look away. They sat with the question. And then they began describing what readiness meant to them now. They said being ready did not mean having every part of life perfect. It did not mean being fearless. It did not mean having all the answers. It meant being willing to build, willing to communicate, willing to choose someone not only when emotions felt easy, but when life demanded patience and maturity. They said they wanted a marriage that felt like two people protecting the connection rather than competing inside it. A marriage where both people could dream without one person having to shrink. A marriage where love was not proven by constant drama but by consistency. People around them listened differently now. This was no longer the version of your soulmate they thought they knew. Then your soulmate said something no one expected. They said, I already know who I would want beside me when life gets difficult." The room went silent again. Someone immediately asked, "Who?" "Your soulmate," smiled. But this time there was no nervousness in it. There was emotion. They said, "That is the conversation I need to have with them first." "My child," those words carried a decision within them. A quiet one, but a decision nonetheless. Your soulmate had crossed an internal line. They had gone from asking whether marriage was something they wanted to asking whether they had found the person with whom they could imagine it. They had gone from protecting themselves from possibility to protecting the possibility itself. Still, heaven's message in this story is not that every imagined future is guaranteed. True love is not control. Connection is not ownership. Two hearts must still choose freely. But there is beauty in honest realization, and your soulmate was finally standing at the edge of theirs. Later, after the conversation ended, people left the room still talking about what they had heard. Your soulmate remained quieter than everyone else. The words they had spoken kept replaying inside them. Saying them publicly had made them impossible to dismiss privately. They thought about you again. This time, not as a distant possibility. As a conversation waiting to happen. They imagined what they would say if there were no fear between you. They imagined explaining why they had been hesitant. Why they sometimes appeared detached when they were actually overwhelmed. Why certain moments between you mattered more than they admitted. Why the idea of marriage had once frightened them and why, strangely, thinking of you made that fear feel smaller. Then another thought entered their mind, one they had been avoiding. What if you had stopped waiting? What if your heart had begun moving somewhere else? What if the silence they thought was protecting them had convinced you they did not care? That thought changed their expression. Suddenly, this was no longer an abstract realization. There was a sense of time. Not panic. Not fear. But awareness. Your soulmate understood that emotional truth cannot remain hidden forever without consequences. If they wanted clarity, they would eventually have to risk hearing an answer. If they wanted a future, they would have to stop living only inside imagined conversations. They reached for their phone. Then stopped. They stared at it for several seconds. Your name was not far from their thoughts. Neither was the memory of something you once said, something they had replayed more times than you knew. It had seemed small when you said it, but now it returned like a quiet invitation. Your soulmate wondered whether perhaps they had misunderstood the meaning of that moment. Perhaps there had been more openness between you than they had allowed themselves to believe. Their hand moved again. This time they unlocked the screen. They began typing. The first message was too careful, so they deleted it. The second sounded too casual, so they deleted that too. Then they stopped trying to sound unaffected. They typed something honest. Something simple. Something that had the potential to open the door to everything they had just confessed around that room. But before they sent it, another memory returned, and this one changed the entire direction of what they were about to say. Because there was one part of the marriage conversation they had not told anyone. One private truth. One reason their thoughts had been so strongly focused on you lately. Something had happened recently that made them realize your connection may have been more significant than they understood at the time. And when they finally tell you what that moment was, you may understand why their next message is not going to be the message you expect at all.